Anytime you think, I want, fill in the blank, I don't care what it is, that is not love. Love is a gift that you offer because you have generated it inside yourself. And how do you generate love? Well, the only way to generate love is you use your agency to choose principles of truth.
We're learning shocking new details in the case of disgraced YouTube mom RubyFranke. Court documents now allege her business partner, JodiHildebrandt, used rope to tie up Franke's children.
Line who hate me, who would like to cancel me, who would like to see me either burn in hell, as I have told, or disappear off the face of the earth. And I'm not going anywhere.
On August 30th, Franke's 12-year-old son escaped from JodiHildebrandt's home in Ivins, Utah. The boy had obvious wounds and had apparently been tied up with duct tape. He ran to a neighbor for help, asking for food and water and for the neighbor to call police.
Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. If you are new here, welcome. I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button. And if you're returning, welcome back. I truly do appreciate your support on my channel, and I hope that you are subscribed as well. So here we are for yet another update as we follow the RubyFranke and JodiHildebrandt case. This is the third video that I have done on this case already, so I do recommend watching the previous two and of course this one to get the whole picture of what's been happening. And I will link the first two videos that I've done in the description box below. And if you are someone that has been following this case in real time, you know that it's just been a daily thing to see new developments and to hear more information and to discover just how truly bizarre and depraved this whole situation is. And it's been this poop show to try to keep it all straight. However, if you are somebody who hears about this case in the future, sometime years from now, and someone says they remember the bizarre child abuse case of RubyFranke, just know that as it was all unfolding right before our eyes, we've all been astounded about what comes out on a daily basis. I follow a lot of true crime stories, and I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, where just when you think things are going to start settling down, another bombshell just drops and it just continues to get crazier and crazier. So in this video, I do want to share some of the latest court and legal updates, as well as continue to shine a light on the stories of JodiHildebrandt's past victims, as it gives us the necessary insight as to why and how RubyFranke's kids ended up in this horrifying situation. But before we get into the latest updates, I do want to provide at least a semi-brief recap of everything that's been happening up to this point. And while I will timestamp it for anybody that wants to skip over the recap because you've probably been following this story up until now, I do kind of recommend listening to the recap, because even in the information that we've had up to date, and even within the previous parts of the story that we've already gone over, there are things that have come to light about the time leading up to where things are now that add important context. So Ruby and Kevin Franke are a family out of Utah who ran a family vlogging channel called 8 Passengers for 7 years, between the years 2015 and 2022. And in their videos, they shared their daily activities as a family, as most family vlogging channels do. However, they would also frequently and bizarrely record themselves doling out discipline to their kids, which is weird in and of itself, because I'm not really that familiar with family vlogging channels because I don't find them particularly entertaining. But this one was similar in a lot of ways to other family vlogging channels. It occurred to me just how truly bizarre it is to include so much content as a parent where you're hyper-focused on your kids' mistakes and the consequences of those mistakes. Like, most of these families who do this seem to record all of the happy, silly, fun, crazy things they do as a family, but I don't feel like it's normal to consistently record yourself punishing your kids unless you're super nanny or something. But the questionable part wasn't just the fact that these kids were being disciplined, because we all agree that disciplining your kids is a normal part of raising them, or at least it should be. It's that most people felt that Ruby and Kevin Franke's parenting methods were far too harsh and borderline abusive at times, and started to raise red flags amongst their 2.3 million subscriber audience, as well as many family members and neighbors. There were situations like where Ruby's 6-year-old daughter Eve had forgotten her lunch at home, and when her teacher texted Ruby to say, "Hey, can you bring your daughter lunch?" Ruby basically said, "No. She's 6 years old. She knows that she's supposed to pack a lunch. The natural consequence of not bringing your own lunch is the fact that she's going to have to go hungry, and hopefully she will learn her lesson from that." And she also made the point in this particular video that she hoped that nobody else in the class would offer her daughter food. There was also the situation where Chad played a prank on his little brother, and in response to that prank, Ruby and Kevin felt that it was appropriate to take away his bedroom and force him to sleep on a beanbag in the living room for 7 months. And then there was another situation where Ruby was frustrated with having to wake Eve up to go to preschool because she would wake up super grumpy, and it was just a really difficult time getting her ready. So she felt that if Eve could not get herself up and wake herself up on time, that Eve could just sleep through preschool and suffer the consequence of not being responsible enough to wake up on time and get ready to go in preschool. So in the process of these so-called parenting, they made it clear that they felt that their methods were superior, as evidenced by the fact that they would simultaneously offer parenting advice to their viewers and insist that anyone who had a problem with what they were doing was simply too soft on their kids.
So we've learned through experience that when people get triggered or get upset by something, it usually is because that something means something about them. And so if this experience has been hard for you to watch, how we've parented our kids and how we've held consequences with them and placed firm boundaries and held them to those expectations and encourage them and reward them when they show good judgments. If you're triggered by all of that, then that's probably a good chance for you to look at yourself and ask, what about me is this situation telling?
However, after years of portraying themselves as just a normal religious family trying to raise their kids in the right way, just over a year ago, there seems to have been several things that kind of happened all at once or within a very short time period. First, the 8 Passengers channel was deleted from YouTube, and then Ruby and Kevin re-emerged on YouTube on an already established mental health / family counseling / marriage counseling channel called the ConneXions Classroom, which was a platform that had been run by a licensed mental health expert by the name of JodiHildebrandt. And initially, it seems as though both Kevin and Ruby were participating in this platform with other parents, sharing their experiences and raising kids during turbulent times. And I also want to add in here that Jodi was apparently a counselor to the Franke family for a couple of years before they deleted their channel, and the overlap of the last few years of the 8 Passengers channel on YouTube and the time that JodiHildebrandt started working with them was also the time period that the audience noticed a marked escalation in the treatment of the kids, and that is important to note. Eventually, the content with RubyFranke in it switched from involving both Kevin and Ruby to content without Kevin at all. And then the content became Ruby in videos with the founder of the ConneXions Classroom, JodiHildebrandt. On the website, Ruby was listed as a certified mental health coach as well. And she and Jodi started doing regular podcasts together to advise and coach others through raising kids, dealing with problematic behaviors, and improving relationships between spouses. And during one of their joint episodes, Ruby explained that she had deleted her channel because she felt the advice from her audience was harming her children, but not the disciplinary measures inflicted by her and her husband. And as I've been trying to piece this confusing timeline together, it seems as though Kevin was no longer part of the content because he and Ruby had split up. And it has been revealed that the separation was at the instruction of Jodi, as she insisted, as their trusted family therapist, that this would help and heal their marriage. And part of that therapy was that it was necessary for Kevin to leave the home. Ruby also told Kevin that any communication between them would happen if she initiated it, and that included any contact with his kids. In the episodes that Ruby and Jodi continued to share together, they would discuss abstract concepts like avoiding living in distortion, living in truth, and whatever else that came up that they felt that they sounded smart, but it really just kind of sounded bizarre and nonsensical.
We are surrounded quite literally by people who are not learning principles of truth, and they're justifying being dishonest. They don't see anything wrong with being irresponsible. In fact, here's in many instances, people profit off of being not humble.
Our whole life's goal is to make our kids happy. And most of the time we're trying to make our kids happy. What we're actually doing is being in distortion and inviting them into a controlling dynamic.
But apparently they had enough people who appreciated what they had to say because they sold learning materials and courses centered on what they believed was beneficial life guidance. And though the 8 Passengers channel was deleted quite a while ago and the children's online presence drastically diminished, the concerns that viewers had had for years were finally confirmed on August 30th, when the second youngest of Ruby's 6 children escaped from a home in Ivins, Utah, which turned out to be JodiHildebrandt's home. And he ran to the neighbor's home for food, for water, and for help. He was extremely emaciated and malnourished and was discovered to have duct tape on his wrists and ankles and deep wounds all over his body. When the police went to the home to investigate, Russell's younger sister Eve was discovered in the home as well and found to be in similar horrifying condition. Jodi was arrested immediately, and Ruby was arrested shortly after in Springville, Utah, which is about 4 hours away from Jodi's home in Ivins. Turns out, all of their lectures about not living in distortion and raising kids in truth was a total farce and a sham, and they turned out to be completely distorted and deceitful themselves. And they have both been in jail since the arrest, where they belong. It is my understanding from reports that I've heard that the 4 youngest Franke children, Julie, Abby, Russell, and Eve, are in state custody, and the oldest daughter, Sherry, is at college. Immediately after the arrest of her mother, she did post on Instagram that it needed to happen, and since the arrest, she has been attending the court hearings with her own attorney. Chad is the second oldest son, just younger than Sherry, and it is unclear where he has been the whole time, but I did hear something yesterday that suggested that after his parents, Kevin and Ruby, split 14 months ago, he chose to live with Kevin. So he may still be with his father at this point. I have not heard a confirmation on that, so if you know, please leave it in the comments. Kevin has hired an attorney by the name of Randy Kester, and his attorney has said that since Ruby cut off contact with Kevin after they split 14 months ago, he claims that Kevin had no idea that the kids were staying in Jodi's home and no idea that his children were being severely physically and psychologically harmed by his wife and the woman who had been their trusted family counselor for so long. And the world has been absolutely baffled by this contrast of seeing 2 parents who attempt to portray themselves as raising this upstanding family who live by the basics of their religion, which is to love, to serve, to show compassion, and to show grace and kindness, and who repeatedly lectured the rest of their multi-million subscriber audience on how to properly raise our kids, only to find out that their kids were being abused in the worst way. Not only that, this therapist, JodiHildebrandt, who had this long established platform as a marriage and family counselor with hundreds of clients over the years, actually has a long career that is dark and destructive. There are past clients and family members coming out of the woodwork to expose her sadistic, cruel, and evil tactics that have led to a massive trail of broken families left behind her over the course of at least 15 years in practice. It's safe to say that on top of everything the Franke parents were already inflicting on their kids, inviting JodiHildebrandt into their lives was pretty much the equivalent of linking arms with a demon. Both Jodi and Ruby have been in jail since the arrest, both facing 6 counts of felony child abuse, which, if found guilty on all charges, each of these charges carry a 15-year sentence on their own, so they could both be looking at a 90-year sentence. And at this point, the court of public opinion has indicated that there would be no objection to this whatsoever. There was an initial hearing on September 8th to get the ball rolling, during which the first bombshell was dropped by RubyFranke herself when she decided it would be appropriate to announce to the court that her son, the 12-year-old who was starved and duct taped, was actually a sexual predator who had abused at least 20 other kids and had been looking at porn since he was 3 years old. Allegations that we have every reason to believe are totally false. But since the claims were made, the judge was obligated to order that the son needed to be placed in a home with no other children. So this kid, after being severely abused, starved, and physically harmed, after being rescued from this hellhole, he will now have to live separately from his other siblings because his mom is a psycho. So there have been a few court and legal developments, so let's go over those first. There was an initial hearing on September 8th in which Ruby decided to call her son a monster. After that, another court date had been set for September 18th, which was supposed to be a bail hearing, but it ended up being postponed.
So let's check in with her. Sierra, what is going on out there? What happened to the hearing?
Yeah, Terry, this morning we were expecting to see both Hildebrandt and Franke here at the Washington County Courthouse in St. George. It was expected to be a bail hearing, but just hours before that hearing began, we were told by officials that it had been postponed. Just in the past hour, I spoke with Douglas Terry, and he's the attorney for JodiHildebrandt. I asked him why this hearing was postponed, and he said because of copious amounts of evidence in this case. There's just too much to go through. Originally, though, the hearing was expected to be a bail hearing. So Judge John Walton would have determined whether Hildebrandt, Franke, or both were eligible for bail. And if they were and it was posted, they could have been released as early as this afternoon. However, they're still being held at the Washington County Jail because this hearing never happened. Also at the hearing expected today, it was possible that Judge John Walton would have set a preliminary hearing date. And that, of course, would be to determine whether there's enough probable cause to move forward in this case. But there was speculation that there would be pushback in that end of things because the prosecution was asking for more time. That's what's interesting, is that this hearing was postponed because of all of the information. Now, I mentioned that I spoke with Terry, who is the attorney for Hildebrandt. I asked him why this hearing was postponed and whether he wanted to speak on camera. And what he told me is he was uncomfortable speaking on camera because he still didn't know that much about the case, which really goes to show you the amount of evidence that we have here. 3 weeks ago is when they were arrested. Terry, you spoke about it just moments ago when that 12-year-old boy broke free just about 20 minutes away from where we are right now. So that's been about 3 weeks that both sides have had to go through all of this evidence. It just goes to show you just how much there is in this case. As of right now, there's no official hearing date set for the future, but the motion that was filed stipulated that it should be set after October 5th. So that's almost 3 weeks away from right now, but still no official date set.
So they've already had 3 weeks to go through everything that they have, and they still need more time because there is so much information and evidence to go through, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it could make a really difficult case for their defense. I'm just going to say, I think that most of that information will not be in their favor, and I don't envy their defense and having to go through all of it and try to make these two women look even remotely sane or try to justify their actions at all. I have heard in follow-up reports, I believe their new pretrial date is set for October 17th. So until then, Jodi and Ruby will be enjoying a little dose of what it's like to have their mobility restricted as they sit in jail for the next little bit. On September 19th, there was a child welfare hearing held in Provo, Utah, which Kevin Franke attended with his attorney, Randy Kester, and Ruby was also able to tune in virtually. One of the key points that this hearing was supposed to determine was scheduling, and also whether or not following hearings would be closed off to the public. The judge understands that there's a lot of sensitive information related to children in this case. Obviously, they are the focal point of it, but she also recognizes that there's a lot of public interest in it. And while I'm sure that there are some people that tune in just for entertainment purposes, I honestly would like to believe that most people who are following it genuinely want to make sure that these kids are okay and that justice is served. However, this reporter, Amanda Gilbert, who works for KUTV out of Utah, did say that if this case is closed, then it also means that the oldest daughter, Sherry Franke, would be kept out of them as well, which I honestly think would be a bad thing for these kids. They need someone in their corner who knows exactly what it is that they're going through and who stood right alongside them and stood up for them in numerous instances.
Sherry is in college. She's an adult. So was she there in person or did she also attend virtually?
She was there in person with her attorney.
Is she there because obviously these are her siblings and she has an interest in what is going to happen with them?
What kind of a question is that? Why else would she be there? I just kind of think that was a dumb thing to ask.
Yes, yes. We did talk to her today. She said or her attorney said no comment. But that is what we would assume. The attorney for the other children was also there.
What did the attorney for Kevin Franke say? Because obviously these children are not in Kevin Franke's custody right now. They're in some type of protective custody, right?
Yes, they are. And DCFS was there today. We did speak with, for the first time, the dad, Kevin Franke's attorney, Randy Kester, afterward. He essentially said, quote, that they're focused on trying to heal the family. And he said, get the children back to living with a family member, because he said that's in their best interest. And he, of course, said that they're working towards getting the children back to live with the dad, Kevin Franke.
So that is all I have heard about court dates, legal updates, as far as the legal proceedings. And this video is being recorded on Sunday, September, I think is the 23rd. So if there has anything that comes out by the time I post this, clearly I am not going to be able to include it, but that is the information I have to date. Now, since this happened, there have been a whole slew of people coming out against these two women. As for Ruby, as I mentioned earlier, her oldest daughter posted on social media immediately after the arrest that this was something that needed to happen. I believe her exact phrase was, "Finally." Ruby's sisters, Bonnie and Julie, posted their own statements about how they didn't know that this was all going on, as Kevin and Ruby completely cut off contact with their whole family 3 years ago, and that they were glad that this nightmare was over and that justice was being served regarding the horrific abuse of their nieces and nephews. And this was Ruby's nephew during a media interview on September 15th.
What was your reaction when you heard about these charges?
Disgusted. Horrified.
I feel like at the beginning of this case, most of us expected that as more information came out, it would primarily be focused on Ruby and Kevin. However, the twist has been JodiHildebrandt. This woman is the devil, literally. The firestorm of who JodiHildebrandt is and what she's done in her career was kicked off when Jessie Hildebrandt, Jodi's niece, came forward and laid out all of the abuse that she faced as a child when her parents took her to Jodi when she was a teenager to help correct some of her problematic behavior. And this was just a glimpse into the truly evil person that is JodiHildebrandt. Jessie said that during that time, Jodi inflicted the same kind of abuse that both Russell and Eve were found to have been dealing with, being starved, bound, isolated, berated, and tortured, both physically and psychologically. And Jessie wanted to insist that, yes, it is Ruby's children that are at the center of this, and they were the ones that were facing the abuse, but that these are truly Jodi's tactics, and these are things that she has been doing for over a decade at least.
Jessie Hildebrandt lived with Jodi and received therapy with air quotes, as she described it to me today. Jessie described abuse while living with Jodi back in 2009 or so. She went into detail telling me she was tied up, duct taped, blindfolded, experienced severe isolation, severe emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse, among other things, such as being forced to sleep outside in the snow. I asked her, among many other things, if she's met RubyFranke, to which she had told me she had not and hadn't heard of her until all of this. She told me that she's seen some of her videos on YouTube now, found them to be quite triggering, but telling from her own experiences.
It's been a really interesting experience watching everyone focus on Ruby, and I understand why, but this is Jodi. These are Jodi's words. These are Jodi's ideas. These are over decades old, so.
In the longer version of Jessie's story, she said that Jodi convinced her that she had done things that she had never done before and that she was guilty for sins that she had never committed, and had her beaten down to the point of being terrified of herself. Another past client of Jodi's, said that he had been part of one of her groups with his wife, and he knew of other group members who had been instructed to live apart from their spouses and witnessed her therapies literally destroy their marriages. Yet he was able to take a step back and react in the way that I think most of us would react. And he said, "This is crazy. We're not doing this." But unfortunately, other past clients have not been so lucky. Another past client of Jodi's named Adam Steed came forward this week as well, and his story is absolutely gut-wrenching to hear. Adam starts out by saying that he had been abused by leaders of the Boy Scouts of America as a child, which left him with unimaginable harm that he spent years trying to repair and overcome. He eventually got to a place of feeling relatively at peace. He got married and he had kids and moved on with his life, but because of the things that he was still dealing with from his past, he wanted to go to counseling with his wife. They had a young child at the time and another one on the way, and he wanted to continue that process of healing. But entering into the clutches of JodiHildebrandt would only take the things he had experienced early in life and not only make them worse and reignite the trauma he had spent years working to overcome, but become a tool to be used against him and create a whole new level of torture for him to face. And this man is absolutely broken, and you can hear the brokenness in every syllable of his words, and there are no words to describe what he has been through.
JodiHildebrandt's doing the same thing right now with these kids that she did to me.
Adam Steed says he went to JodiHildebrandt for counseling because he needed help, but she betrayed his trust, and now he's here to tell his story. One of her former clients is a man named Adam Steed. Steed says he was sexually abused by someone with the Boy Scouts of America when he lived in Idaho as a child. He then moved to Utah. He became married, and that's when he met JodiHildebrandt. Adam Steed says he and his wife were seeking counseling for ordinary issues that come up in any marriage.
Yeah, just normal marriage issues. Outside the fact there was a lot of stress on our marriage because we had done a settlement for child abuse with Boy Scouts of America, and we were having we had a 1-year-old baby and we had a newborn coming along, and we were both in school at Brigham Young University trying to do all of our credits, and my ex-wife had some issues as well that were kind of difficult, and I had trauma from what happened to me in the past, and we were just trying to be normal people and live a normal life and start and have a beautiful life after some of the things we've gone through.
How did the counseling start? Did it seem to go well at first, or were there red flags right away?
JodiHildebrandt's more sophisticated than a normal person in a lot of ways. She evolved into what she became. She would put us in a phase 1. There's phase 2 and phase 3 of the particular group she was in at the point. And phase 1, it wasn't very intense. It was lighthearted and fun. And, think of like a PG movie or something, and a lady that's just charismatic and fun and teaching these principles about delusion, denial, and all this kind of stuff. Codependency, using small examples in people's lives where they didn't realize they were in this state, and the whole room laughing about it. That was phase 1, and it was, couples, all happy couples, thinking they were with this incredible lady. When she separated the couples into all women and all men groups, then after she gained everyone's trust, then really bad things began to happen. And what's different in my case is that when I chose to leave this cult-like group, Jodi tried to punish me, and she worked through BYU Honor Code office and legal measures to try to hurt me. And I have the emails between my ex-wife and her planning out all this stuff, talking about what the real issues in our marriage were, and then them evolving that into something drastically different with allegations that would totally destroy your life. and how that evolution happened from what they originally were like is just astounding. I had to come forward because when I heard that they were doing the same thing to those little kids that they did to me to hide their crimes, it was totally predictable. And I knew my records would just completely show the world the truth of how dangerous this lady really is, that are close to her, that are probably not really good people in the first place, but that she enhances their abilities under her guidance to do incredibly criminal things.
Adam claims that JodiHildebrandt conspired with his then wife to accuse him of sexually abusing their child.
I never had the courage to talk about this openly because the damage was so bad. After Jodi and my ex-wife got done trying to make me look like a child abuser and a sexual addict and a rapist and everything else, having been a victim that came forward to change the laws to protect children, and having the insecurities that victims have, the stigma and all that stuff, and Jodi working on me to try to make me look like I was a predator. In her final stage, when I refused to pay all the money and refused to stay in the group and was so uncomfortable with it, what they did to me, the coordinated attack to create the solution and all the stuff, I have all the documentation and these fine. I mean, I'm Jodi coaching my ex-wife in fine. I'll share that in this other interview, the exact words as she coaches her through how to make people think that they're coming up with the idea themselves. When she's trying to contort people's minds into thinking that there had been abuse and violence. And when you start to see this evidence of what the real issues were, what Jodi's agenda was, how she went about it, and the documentation for it, these people will be hung. I mean, the game's over. And these little kids that they're accusing of abuse, sexual abuse right now, to hide their crimes, that's just an old MO. And
so
I'll be
what
able to
Ruby
prove
said in court that day about one of her children sexually abusing other children and then people in the neighborhood, you're saying that's the same thing that Jodi tried to do to you?
Well, not just to me, to probably hundreds of people. And there's going to be so many victims coming forward with the same story. A story that if you told it on your own by yourself, everyone would think you're weird and creepy.
Adam also posted this long post on Facebook, and I am so glad that he is finally seeing justice served to this satanic, demon-possessed, sewage-filled excuse for a human being. Now, when it comes to the horrors that were being inflicted on the Franke children, we know that things were bad, but what has come out, it is so much worse than what we had originally thought. In recorded audio of the officers who responded to the area that Russell was in the home that he escaped from, as they were going through the home of JodiHildebrandt, they discovered a safe room or a panic room located in the garage.
Here in this secluded Ivins, Utah neighborhood, where RubyFranke's 12-year-old emaciated son broke free. But when first responders arrived on the scene, inside this home, they found a panic room.
He says it's a large room, it's a panic room.
A shocking revelation made by first responders who were called to JodiHildebrandt's home back in August. After a young boy escaped from the home and ran to a neighbor for help, investigators found a panic room inside.
Hey, LT, there's a panic room inside the garage. Downstairs, underneath the garage.
Radio recordings from the Santa Clara Ivins Police Department captured the dramatic moments when the room is discovered.
He says it's a large room, it's a panic room.
First responders were called to the home in southern Utah on August 30th after a harrowing 911 call came into police.
This kid has obviously been, I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
The caller told first responders a 12-year-old boy arrived at his front door, emaciated and asking for food and water. Investigators later determined the boy was the son of RubyFranke, the YouTuber mom who became popular from her 8 passengers YouTube page.
We also know that there were 2 kids found to be extremely emaciated and malnourished, which were Russell and Eve. It has been said that there were at least 1 other kid in the home at the time that was found that was too scared to talk to officers. But this is probably the worst part of all of it.
Been able to obtain these 3 search warrants thanks to our Fox 13 assignment desk team, and I'm going to kind of go through parts of each of them so we go through exactly what happened after police arrived. So we'll start here. This search warrant is specifically for anything used to bind the children. So you could see all of this highlighted right here is exactly what police were able to obtain through this search warrant, and it contains things like Scotch tape and rope. Now, to shine some light on this, I want to read directly from the affidavit for this particular search warrant because it really shines some light on the exact moments following the police arriving. So it says, quote, medical personnel removed the duct tape, located open wounds. The victim informed officers and medical personnel that the wounds were from the rope that was used to tie the victim to the ground. The victim then informed the officers that Jodi put the ropes on their ankles and wrists and that they used cayenne pepper and honey to dress those wounds. Now, the victim told officers that 2 other siblings were in the home when he left, a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old.
They used rope to tie these kids to the ground, and the wounds from the rope and the duct tape were treated with bandages soaked in cayenne pepper and honey. Why? Just why? I don't think it can be overstated as to how depraved this individual is. I mean, both Ruby and Jodi, but this person in particular, and the more information that has come out about Jodi, I can't help but see the parallels between somebody like JodiHildebrandt and the behaviors of cult leaders like Jim Jones or Keith Raniere or Charles Manson or Ann Hamilton Byrne and John Money and David Miscavige and Bonnie Nettles. And because of what they were able to convince their followers to do. Jodi clearly has a history of leading people to just completely destroy their own lives and destroy their loved ones and destroy everything that matters to them, including their own children. It seems that with Jodi's past, it truly feels like she was enjoying this idea of creating her own cult, because that word has been used numerous times to describe the things that she was teaching in her ConneXions classroom. And she enjoyed the fact that she could manipulate people into losing all sense of reality and morality, where she could gain absolute control over them to the point where she didn't need to be the one to entirely destroy and ruin them, but get them to the point where they would just go about destroying themselves. We've seen so many times in history where people can gain a position of power, whether it be through religious leadership or just being a charismatic and convincing person. And in Jodi's case, because she was trusted in her field as a mental health expert, and because she claimed to be a devout follower of God and Jesus Christ. And we can just be absolutely fascinated by how effective these people are at manipulating people into believing, again, the most nonsensical ideas and behaving in the most depraved and immoral ways. And from the outside looking in, we're all like, how could anyone on earth possibly convince you to go along with such egregious and destructive behavior? Like, why wouldn't your conscience and your common sense kick in and force you to step back and say, that's not right, you're a psycho, I'm not doing that? Because the question that a lot of people have repeated is, despite what Jodi believed and was instructing people to do, how could Ruby have been manipulated into believing in things like tying up her own kids and allowing this kind of severe physical abuse was actually for their well-being? Yet, as we look at the power that charismatic, persuasive, sophisticated, and narcissistic people can have on others, while it doesn't make any sense to those of us that are looking at it from a sane and rational perspective, to the people who are in the midst of it, these things absolutely do make sense, and the ends justify the means. And in that situation, and if an expert with all of the right credentials, the education, the experience, and the background told you that doing something harmful to your child was the way to help them, or doing something harmful to your family, or doing something that you would have otherwise thought was totally bonkers, but they said it would help them or cure them of something that they're dealing with, or it was the answer to a struggle that they were facing, would you have the strength and the wherewithal to say, absolutely not? That doesn't make any sense. I don't care how many certifications or licenses or degrees you have. I'm not going along with this. And would we have the ability to recognize it if it were something that we were led to slowly? As Adam said, everything seemed fine at first. And I know that the word grooming is something that's thrown around a lot these days, and people think that it's solely about predators grooming their victims for sexual purposes, but this is an ideological grooming. Again, Jodi was in this position of trust and power. She started with the right words, the right conversations, the right material. As Adam called it, this was phase 1. And once she gained their trust and established a foundation, the therapies and ideas got more intense. And not only that, she isolated them from each other. She removed their support system and she became their support system. What started out as seemingly harmless conversations, before they knew it, his wife believed things that were completely off the wall and untrue, and accepted things that did not actually align with reality. And she was absolutely willing to blow up their lives over it. And when Adam became a threat to Jodi, she made sure to discredit him and make him out to be the monster before he could expose who the real problem was. But of course, despite what anyone tells you or convinces you to do, or convinces anyone to do, it doesn't let you off the hook for the things that they do while they appear to be in this trance or under the control of an evil person. Because at the end of the day, the accountability for your own actions, it rests on you. But it just makes you wonder if a victim of David Koresh or Warren Jeffs came forward and said, I'm sorry for what I did, I wasn't in my right mind, and knowing what we know about so many of these groups after the fact, would we be understanding towards them at all? And would it change our view of what their consequences should be compared to the person at the forefront of it all? And knowing these tactics of Jodi's from other people's personal experiences, I think it offers more perspective when we hear statements from Kevin's attorney of how much of a hold she really had on them.
Meanwhile, Kester doubles down, saying he believes the entire Franke family was brainwashed at the hand of JodiHildebrandt.
It's a very delicate situation. These kids have been horribly brainwashed, indoctrinated, and it's scary.
Brainwashed by who?
Jodi.
Do you believe that Ruby was brainwashed by Jodi?
Yes. And I say that because everyone, the focus has been on Kevin. Where was he? Why was he absent? How does that all happen? So he was doing that at Ruby's direction, who I think was being directed by Jodi. This is the way that you've got to repair your marriage and repair your family. So they were all sort of kind of being manipulated, and this is just my opinion, by Jodi.
As I mentioned earlier, Jodi had been involved with the family for at least a couple of years before everything seemed to completely fall apart. And knowing who she is and what she was doing to their home behind the scenes, because it was what she had done to so many homes in the past, it gives us insight as to why people really started to notice an escalation in the treatment of their kids before the channel was completely shut down for good. For example, another content creator who had been putting together videos based on this stuff going on the 8 Passengers channel a couple of years ago, and from what I've seen as I've watched more of the clips of this family, especially from their earlier years, during their first few years, they really did seem to be fairly normal. Ruby seemed to be much more relaxed in her parenting and even willing to accept that her kids might have their own opinions and paths in life.
My job as a parent is not to force them to do anything. I don't force my kids to go to church, and I don't force my kids to keep the commandments. I can't make them have the same values and principles I do. I've seen members of families stop talking to each other for decades because they didn't agree on a value. And I just think that's so sad, and I don't ever want that to happen in my house.
And that falls in stark contrast to just a few years later when Jodi and Ruby are sitting on this couch talking about how if your kids don't align with you, then you should be willing to cut them out of your life completely.
So Jodi and I have each shared an example from our own lives of what real love looks like, which isn't what the world thinks is love. They'd push back and say, whoa, that's mean. You're not going to be loved. Your children are going to kick you out of their lives. So when people say, well, if you do that, then your child's not going to trust you. If you do that, then your child's not going to love you. Well, exactly. I'm just revealing that my child is refusing to love unconditionally. I don't want anyone in my life who's not going to be loving. So if my child will only love me if I give them what they want, then that's not really love.
So this takes a very strong soul, because most of us are not even willing to consider not having our children in our lives. And I hope that you'll reconsider.
And then there was the situation of Ruby absolutely losing it when she discovered that one of her daughters was going to be participating in a flash mob TikTok dance to a clean version of a song by Flo Rida, and seemed absolutely convinced that this would send her daughter straight to hell.
Said, I have a concern about the TikTok dances. And she said in the fall semester and in the spring semester, we need to have a performance. A flash mob is a great way to get it in. It's efficient. The kids love it. They have fun with it. And they are able to check off their performance for their grade. I said, my problem is the choice of songs. And she says, well, all the songs were approved by me. And I said, so your standard, what you allow in your school is pop culture, what the kids really like and what shows up in commercials. That's your standard. I would hope that the principal where my kids go to school, that the standard would be truth, that the standard would be principles, that the standard would be morality. You are introducing them to the world.
And what I didn't know was that Kevin was also involved in this little incident. He decided to take it all the way to the school board to complain about this particular song choice.
This past term, my 13-year-old daughter registered for a dance PE class. She was shocked to learn that the entire curriculum for the class was focused on replicating viral dance videos from the social media platform TikTok.
And then there was the really heartbreaking situation of Kevin and Ruby taking Christmas away from their two youngest children.
I'm scared to share this because knowing people these days, I don't know if people are gonna, how they're gonna respond. Kevin and I have decided that we are going to give the gift of truth to them this year for Christmas. We are going to give them the gift of boundaries, and we're going to give them the gift of repentance. And we told them that this year they are not going to be visited by Santa. We let them know that the Christmas morning, their 4 older siblings will be getting Christmas presents to open, and that they will have the gift of love from their dad and I.
So I believe that this was during the time that Jodi was a counselor to the family. And so we can assume that at least part of this disciplinary measure was influenced by her and her therapy. And it's just one more demonstration of her sadistic nature, as she intentionally targeted a figure of joy and excitement for these kids who still believe in Santa, and not only set out to destroy their belief in him and eliminate any shred of magic still left in their childhood, but she wanted them to actually feel punished by Santa, because in their minds, it wouldn't just be their parents that were trying to teach them something, but that Santa thought that they were being bad and selfish as well. Now, some of you might think that I'm starting to make excuses for Kevin and Ruby when I'm talking so much about the brainwashing tactics of JodiHildebrandt, and I want to make it clear that I'm absolutely not excusing them in any way. I'm just bewildered by the fact that JodiHildebrandt had so many victims in the past who all had similar stories. And when people say that, hey, this woman had my spouse, convinced of things that were not true at all, it sheds a different light on the question, how did the kids end up in this space where their mother was approving this treatment? Because we can ask ourselves the same question about how Jodi was able to convince Adam's wife that he was a monster when he really wasn't. And how was she able to convince Jesse that she had engaged in these egregious sins and offenses that never actually happened? And how was she able to convince spouses to pack up and live separately from each other? And based on Ruby's accusations of her own son in that initial hearing, it appears that Ruby is still blindly, deeply dedicated to the things that she learned from Jodi. And she does deserve the same treatment, at least in my opinion, because unlike any of these past victims, Ruby didn't just take Jodi's advice, she linked arms with her. She became Jodi 2.0. She became an active participant in promoting Jodi's destructive therapies to others. She joined to help Jodi ruin other families, including her own. And I also have to say, regardless of where Ruby's mental state was or is now, Kevin knew when he left the home 14 months ago who was working with his family and, more importantly, taking care of his kids. When Ruby kicked him out 14 months ago and basically told him, "Don't call us, we'll call you," he said, okay. You would think that being removed from the situation, he would have snapped out of it in some way and realized how psychotic the whole thing was. And even if he didn't know that these kids were being tied up and starved, he had to have had at least an inkling that his children were not in a great environment. He had been there when Ruby was withholding food and making their son sleep on a beanbag for months and threatened to cut up Eve's toys and took Christmas away. He was part of all of those things, even if he wasn't there for the physical part of it. And he was still 100% on board with all of this until the moment he realized that his kids were being physically harmed.
But I would be very, very curious to know if the dad had absolutely no idea that the mother of his 6 children had such terrible abuse issues. Your children don't get emaciated overnight. That is a prolonged and continuous pattern of abuse. And I would be absolutely shocked if this husband had no idea about what his children were suffering at the hands of his, I suppose, still wife. I believe they're separated, not divorced. I mean, to me, there's obviously a reason why he's separated, and we're all curious to hear it. But I'm a little bit suspicious of any story that doesn't have dad aware of this pattern of behavior.
He didn't speak to them or reach out to them or show up on Ruby's doorstep or JodiHildebrandt's doorstep to make sure that they were okay for 14 months. In fact, the only person who did do anything to check on their well-being was the oldest daughter, Sherry, and she's the one that called CPS from her college dorm to ask for a welfare check on her siblings. Again, Kevin knew that his kids were living with psychotic and sadistic manipulators, and he already knew that his wife had no problem with doing things like withholding beds and food from them. Punishments that he himself did not stop or question. I mean, did he not wonder at all what these two could possibly be putting these kids through? And how much do you want to bet that every single day that those kids were facing off with these two monsters, they wondered why the heck their dad didn't show up to save them? The person who is by design supposed to be the protector and to be the physical barrier between themselves and anyone who would hurt them. And he was nowhere to be found. And just because he claims to not have known that they were being tied up and starved, he not only didn't know that, but he didn't know anything because he wasn't there. I can't think of any excuse that would make this okay, and it's going to be hard for him to convince anyone that he should have his kids back. I do honestly hate the idea of kids being separated from their parents. I do. But if we're honest about whether or not these kids should be with their dad at this point, at least with the information that we have to date, my answer is still no. So that is all that I have as far as updates to date, and I will continue to create videos as long as this case is ongoing and as long as things continue to come out. I am trying to keep a close eye on it, and I absolutely do feel for all of Jodi's past victims, and I'm sure that we are going to hear from many, many more of them. And just one final update that I have that I did hear yesterday is that JodiHildebrandt's license, she did surrender it to the state of Utah. So she is no longer credited, licensed, valid, legitimate, whatever you want to call it, to be practicing and to continue her therapy on anybody else. But those are all the updates that I have for this video, but I will continue to compile information as things come out and provide another video as we do have more things to add to this. And unfortunately, it does seem as though I'm sure we will hear from more of Jodi's past clients as they now feel encouraged to speak out about their experiences, and hopefully that they can get some peace and justice from this case as well. Please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below. If there is anything that I missed, feel free to fill us all in the discussion. I do appreciate your support on my channel. If you feel so inclined, there is a little thank you button where you can donate and support the channel in that way. Otherwise, please subscribe, like, comment, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.